So this year, we have two pictures here side by side. We have a picture of the Tulsa Massacre, and then to the right, we have a picture of the January 6th insurrection slide. This year, 2021, there was widespread recognition of the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa Massacre. It was a seminal event in the history of white mob violence against Black people and the history of violence against people of color in the US. This violence has extended long before and after the Civil War to contemporary times. It can be traced up to the events of January 6, 2021 at the US Capitol. And if you see at the bottom of the slide, it says, the more things change, the more things stay the same. And that is a quote that will be reminiscent as we listen to our presenters discuss different events which have taken place in the United States. Next slide, please. Okay, we have grouped white mob violence into two categories, one being overt, which often results in murder, and covert, which are the efforts of the government to enable violent acts. The media often uses the term race riot when it is in fact white supremacist mob violence. So as we listen to the different presentations, I invite you to think of them within the context of overt white mob violence or covert white mob violence. Next slide, please. Okay, this map here shows where events of white supremacist mob violence has occurred throughout the history of the United States. It's identified as Black massacres. These events are overt, easy to recognize as being white supremacist mob violence. We are going to discuss some events that may be very familiar to you, but we're also going to discuss some events that may not be as familiar. Next slide, please. Okay, here we have, again, what was identified or what we've identified as covert violence. And we ask you to consider voter suppression as one form of covert violence. Sometimes it can be covert, other times it can be overt. And you see here where there are different examples of activities that can be done in order to suppress voters' rights. And some of them, you hear about in the news very often, some not as often, such as such as having one booth where you have a large community who has to use one machine in order to vote, or closing the voter site early. And again, a long list of possibilities that could be identified as either covert or overt. Next slide, please. So as we move forward, I ask you to listen to similar themes that run throughout the stories. Themes of rage, hatred, control, dominance, white superiority. These are themes that you will hear throughout.